Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 77 of AWS Made Easy. We're so happy to be joined with H Hough today. Brian, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on your live stream. I'm super excited to just talk to y'all anytime I can, but especially live and talking about AI, Gen AI, AWS. So thanks for having
This
me.
is going to be so much fun, Brian. We've been wanting to have you on the show, like I was telling you earlier. We've been wanting to have you on the show for such a long time, and I'm so glad that we were able to make this work. I know it's on a Friday, just before reInvent, a bunch of exciting stuff being announced. We are literally in front of a fire hose of announcements. The last 3 or 4 days have been insane. At about 2 or 2:30 a.m. my time, and I'm based out of Chennai in India, I suddenly get about 30, 40 pings on my phone with my notifications going off every time there's a AWS announcement being made. It is insane. So just keeping up with all the stuff that's going on. This is a very, very exciting time. There's a lot happening in the AI space, and we have a ton to cover today. So, Steven, do you want to kick it off?
Yeah. Well, we had a nice long itinerary, and then about 24 hours ago, I see this pop up about Party Rock. So immediately I was at a breakfast. I pull out my phone and message Brian. All right, can we cover Party Rock? He's like, yeah, let's do it. So new item number one, but that's the flexibility. That's the world we're in, right? It's I think, Brian, you are so enigmatic of that in terms of like fast-paced changes, right?
100%.
Really, really cool. So yeah, well, I guess first let's introduce you, Brian. You're the AWS DevTools Hero, founder of Tech Stack Playbook. Tell us about your journey into tech, and then let's jump into where you're at right now with Party Rock, with generative AI in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Steven. Thanks, Rahul. So a super crazy journey of how I got into tech. And like it almost was like never going to happen until it happened all of a sudden. And I say that I fell into tech by accident because I used to work for a VC firm. They did like it was like blockchain tech, but like encryption type stuff. Like, like you're building like an infrastructure layer for, cryptographic encrypted blockchain tech. Super, super like cutting edge stuff. And one of their portfolio companies did hackathons. So I went to a hackathon. So this was like fast forward like a year later. So 2019, I found this hackathon. They were doing it at Harvard, and it was East Boston. And I went to it. And I was working at a PR agency at the time, and it just like rocked my world. You're doing like corporate PR, communication, media relations, and then you go to this completely other thing. It was like devoid of everything I had ever been doing or like learned about in school with like PR communication. It was just like this creative playground where you could like build anything. And I had never experienced anything like that before. I knew developers, but I was never like thrown into like this is like super cool skills. So that moment plus DigitalOcean's Hacktoberfest that year fell into 2020, and I just found myself like, you get home from work and you're like learning, like taking online classes, evenings and weekends, and I was obsessed. Like and you're obsessed when it's like the morning before you have to go to work. This is like pre-pandemic, right? Yeah, I had to like go to office, and I was waking up early to like get my hours in to like learn this stuff. It was so cool, and like I really fell into tech. So I left PR, went into tech during the pandemic, and I was like, I need to do this. I need to make the leap. I want to like make this my reality. And yeah, I mean, like I started taking online classes. I became an AWS community builder at the time, which was hands down like I wanted to learn this cutting edge stuff, and that was what propelled me forward, because you get like workshops, you get mentors. And I got involved in co-founding this very big open source project called Corona Tracker. And that was where like I got to learn about, really like doing UI UX for dev teams. I learned about front end. I learned about solution architecting actually at the time. And it was just this whole experience of like learning how to build. I was like, that plus community builders from AWS. It's like, okay, this is the way. To like quote the Mandalorian, I was like, this is what I want to do. And yeah, I mean, I built Stack Playbook partly as like a YouTube experiment, and it was literally just doing like some live streaming and some building in public, and then it blossomed into like, okay, like I can do these certain low level tech things now. Let me see if I can get a client. Let me see if I can get 2 clients. So I kind of like built a business kind of out of like, I kind of like you're building the rocket ship as you're flying it. And I was like doing certain things. I was doing like Squarespace sites, like not even AWS. It was like at the time, it was like, okay, do the things you can make money and then learn the skills for the things you want to do to make like other types of money later down the road. So I was like doing what I could, very small budgets, but it was like I was trying to like learn, and I was going like heavy into the learning. And then you take courses, you start building projects. I found myself speaking at reInvent. I built this social media platform called the Capital Platform. And that was what I spoke in reInvent about, how to become a full stack developer in the cloud. Then like I built a micro payment service for our platform. Was speaking at New York Summit this past year. It was just like, I really fell into this. And then now I'm doing like ML ops and solution architecting, which is like amazing, because now you're like pulling in AWS services, you're like doing all this stuff. So yeah, Stack Playbook had very humble beginnings, but yeah, I've kind of built this dev shop of just myself, building a lot of really cool tech for some really cool areas.
That's
yeah.
Go ahead, Rahul. We're both just trying to take that in.
Me too.
No,
Me too. Still.
No, seriously, but this is just so exciting what you've done with, just your passion, your motivation. You've gotten this far. It's absolutely inspiring, and
Thanks.
kudos to you for all the hard work that you put in. I actually saw your talk at New York, where you were in front of a whole lot of people, and you were talking about all the amazing stuff that you did. That is really awesome. And then we got to catch up later in New York at the CloudFix event, which is again such a pleasure. So awesome. So we want to dive in a little bit more about what you're doing right now.
Yes.
So why don't we jump right in? I know we have tons of stuff to cover. Steven, you want to take a pass at how we want to go through all of this?
All right. Well, let's start with Party Rock, because that's the hot off the presses news that was announced literally yesterday. And then let's talk about what you've done in terms of putting, I guess, going back to the title of the episode, putting Gen AI in production, right? I think most of us have used, open ChatGPT or another AI where, we're typing as a bot, but then what does it take to go from that to something that can get integrated into a product that a company would use? Talking about deployment. Yeah. And then towards the end of the episode, let's just zoom out and talk about, well, what do we think about? Where's this all going? Are we building our benevolent tech overlords? Are we building sky? Where's this going? And how do we take advantage of it? I think we're all AI optimists. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. So why don't we start with Party Rock? DeBriant, you were part of the launch team about that.
Like launch support, yeah. So like we have these different channels in like our the AWS Slack, and it was kind of like we got to like experiment and play around with Party Rock, and the idea was like experiment with the tech, build something cool, and just like test the limits of Party Rock. So it was really fun, because I feel like there's like the end product, which like looks really cool, and that's like what you see in like TechCrunch, and then there's like the development, and there like the chasm between those is so vast sometimes, of like I'm developing this really complicated solution and I want it to look really cool like in Figma. And Party Rock was something where it's so easy to just drag and drop these AI widgets and build an AI application. And I like how, and this is something that actually goes back to a program that I was in called AWS New Voices. And my talk in that was about abstractions. And you learn about like there's certain levels of abstractions with like a CLI, with an SDK, with an application. And with something like with Party Rock, they've fully abstracted it. So you literally just drag and drop. You choose the model, you create a prompt, give a little bit of information, create a placeholder so that the user knows what to do with it. And then you could like write something. And what's really cool about it is like you can chain things together. So if you ever heard of LangChain, you could have agents and that will like link tools together or have flows of how a LLM will work. But with this, you could do something where like if you put in text, you can have AI generating an output. So it's like running a prompt based upon the input, which is cool. And it's like a real-time WebSocket endpoint. And I built this productivity booster, which was super fun. And it's like you put in your to-dos, it'll prioritize them. And then there's 2 chatbots. One is a utility chatbot that's optimized to help you accomplish those tasks. So you could like ask it like, I want to build an AI pipeline in AWS. How would I do that? And it will like write it out in a chat form. And then the other one is an energy booster. So anytime that you're feeling like, oh, like I'm really down, or like, party rock, rizz me up. It'll literally rizz you up, and like it's really cool.
All right. So let me try.
Yeah.
This is the one.
Yeah. That's it. That's the
All
one.
right, and I'm gonna put the link in the comments. Is that all right?
Oh, of course. Yeah. Feel free
Right,
to share it. I'm
Put the
curious to
link
hear what other
in-
people's experience with it is.
So let's see. I'm gonna try an energy boost. I'm gonna say
You have to put in something in the input first. So the way that
sandbox. Okay.
Yeah, so I usually will write it in the sandbox. So I'll do like one. I can actually send you like my to-do list. I'll write it in the chat. I can also share it. Yeah, I shared it in our chat there. I don't know if it included like the lines and stuff, but yeah, you can also like add your own.
There we go. So this is mine. Practice reinvent talk. Pat camera
love it.
gear. Make sure Hotel Suite has bandwidth. All right, let's try yours. Okay.
So copy that and put that into the to-dos loader for processing.
Okay. So the copy. Let me grab yours. Okay. So I'm putting this in here. Okay. Don't even need. And then put this in the to-dos loader for processing. Okay.
Yeah. And then you should see on the right, it should be like processing something.
I think we need to zoom out a tad bit.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
What happened here? 1 second.
I think it's the modal dialog that's hogging up the.
Oh, yeah.
I zoomed too far. Here we go. So I'm pasting in here.
Yep. So you'll see it's like working now.
Oh, got it. Okay. Oh, I need to join the party.
Yeah.
Oh, maybe you have to sign in.
You can sign up
Give me
and
2
it's pretty
seconds.
neat.
All right. Let me put this off screen just to not put my email address public. Give me 1 second here.
By the way, in the 7 minutes, Brian, since we talked about Party Rock and we started the show, I was able to put together a strawman app.
Oh, love it.
And it was pretty amazing.
It's cool, right?
It's really cool. I really wish we could add more modes. So, for example, have a file uploader, have some of these other basic building blocks in there that would actually make this really cool.
Oh, yeah. The AWS team that's on this, they're super responsive. So I imagine if you like tweet at them or like LinkedIn, tag them. Oh, it's working. Yeah. So now it'll like prioritize all those to-dos. And then if you scroll down, it'll give you like information about like why it chose that. Like,
okay, so you told it that you need to make a smoothie, get your notes for your stand-up, prepare your morning sync, update the GenAI CI/CD pipeline. Okay, so you have good things, and it's done. It's ordered them.
yes.
Correct.
Okay.
And it might sometimes incorporate your ordering. So I noticed this, that if you did like, we're doing an ordered list, but if you did like unordered list, like bullets, it would, sometimes you can like tell it like, this is number 1, this is number 2. But sometimes it will like move something that's in like number 2 spot down because it thinks that something's like not as important. So it was really interesting because it didn't think that breakfast was like important. It said like, get your work done before your morning stand-ups. And I was like, oh, that's relatable to development because like I wouldn't probably eat breakfast until after that. And it's like, it's pretty true to life. So, it definitely works and it is smart in that regard. But that's really cool that it like, yeah, it's cool to all that up.
So why don't we use the utility bot next to figure out how to do something specific?
So you could ask it one of the points of like, like how would you handle, or like best tips for a performance review, or like how to do Gen AI pipeline on AWS?
see.
That might be a cool one. Like the
Okay. How should I make a Gen AI pipeline using AWS?
yes. Yeah, usually adding more details helps. But I mean, like, it's throwing in Fargate in there,
Yeah.
EKS. We talked about EKS and ECS the other day.
Right. Store data in S3 for durability. It makes sense. Monitor
CI/CD.
pipeline with CloudWatch. Use Code Pipeline Orchestrator for CI/CD. Yeah, all of these recommendations are great. Can we get more detail in this? Like,
let's see.
give me step by. Steven, let's try. Give me step-by-step instructions to deploy a new pipeline for the Claude Instant model.
Oh, we're really testing the limits of this now.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point of this, right? You
Exactly.
know what the limits of the system are, and great. Create CloudFormation Stack. Oh wow, they've got a Cloud ECS Fargate stack already there. Can you let's go to that URL.
I want to see if this URL works, because that's one of the tricky things.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, I'm even learning as we're going through this.
Let's see. Is that a real URL? No, not a URL.
No, that's not a real URL.
CloudFormation. Is that a repo? Okay.
No.
Okay, but Anthropic exists.
Anthropic should be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, that is
So
like
just made up a bunch of stuff. Okay.
Anthropic.
Interesting. So I think that's where we need to modify the prompt to say like only return URLs.
Yeah.
That are well. That's the hard thing with URLs, right? Is that I think I got asked it to be too specific.
Correct. Why don't we ask you to generate a CloudFormation stack?
But
for
let's see, how about with an API endpoint that can call a LLM?
Nice. There's API
this is
gateway
pretty
in
cool.
there. There's Fargate in there. There's
So I know that we've all spent hours trying to make these things by hand, digging into Stack Overflow. Oh, how does this ref work? Why is there 2 exclamation points? You know, and then there it is. It's there.
I mean, this is amazing, right? Right? I mean, and I almost wonder though, like, so I feel like when I use LLMs or these AI tools, I'll like use it, but then back test it a lot. And but it'll give me like a foundation of like, okay, here are certain params, you know, like here's an overall structure, but you could also ask it too, like, how would I optimize this? Ooh, how do I?
So I think this is a really neat segue into a conversation that I'd like to bring up with almost any of the AWS services, which is AWS has this buffet of all of these different services with 100 different ways of doing the same thing. Like generating this CloudFormation template, I've generally found Code Whisperer to be really good at generating those within the IDE.
Yes.
So this kind of use case where I am not in my IDE trying to generate these templates is rare in my case. Then you have this way of doing it. You have Copilot that can also do that. But just within the AWS services, you can actually have a model running on SageMaker that can then give you, return results for you. How do you filter out, or how do you decide where to start? What set of services do you actually use to build up the simplest of services or simplest of applications, rather?
That is a great question. And that's a hard question too. And I don't think that there's one answer for this, but what I've found is really to kind of hack around and find out. So you sort of like, you get like an idea of what you want to go about building. And I would say, like, if you're building something completely from scratch, I'd say give yourself like a 2-week window to like find out the 80-20 rule. And this is something that one of my mentors from like the very beginning taught me about this. And it's that learn the 20% of the skills that will get you 80% of the work done. And like that hands down helped me so much with development, because you could go down the path of like, okay, do I need to learn Python to do this? Do I need to learn an API framework to then do that? And you can get kind of like very down the rabbit hole very quickly. And sometimes you will need to do that. But I feel like if you want to build something with AI, right? Like you could build something with Party Rock, but is that going to be enough to like get you what you need? You might say, and you just brought that up earlier, you were like, oh, but I want to do file upload. Steven, I sent you that message about how Bedrock incorporates into that. So let's say that we don't want to worry about training a model, because that's a whole thing. We don't want to worry about provisioning a model. We just want an API endpoint that could like send requests to that. So Amazon Bedrock, they just released that very fairly recently, but they have all these foundational models. They have all these things where you literally just ping it, and you're going to like send in some params and get that. So then where it becomes a little bit more complicated is like, okay, you probably need to learn Python, or you probably need to learn like Node.js or TypeScript or something like that. I would probably go Python if you're doing like the data science stuff, just because the way that was described to me, and I agree, like the libraries are just there for working with AI that like JavaScript isn't necessarily as optimized for. So, but you don't have to like go and spend like a year learning Python. Like you can ask ChatGPT and you're like, here's the API endpoint. I need a Python script that can help me ping this and get a response back. And what, like ChatGPT or Hugging Face Chat or Google Bard or what any of these other types of LLMs, it might not give you the right answer, but it could help you get started. And then you could ask it and you're like, I threw this in, but I'm getting this error. Here's my code. Why is that? And now you're sort of creating this like Q&A like testing where you're literally QA testing your own code with an AI pair programming buddy. So then it becomes Bedrock, but maybe Bedrock isn't enough. So where it becomes even more complicated could be like, we have, and I'll give you a great example. So we have these models that were developed, and it runs this Python application, but we're using some models from Hugging Face. We need to download some models from external places. Some models were developed locally. It all fits in a Python app. Then you think, okay, this is going to be significantly more complicated because now we need to roll our own container with Docker. So then, you get it working locally. You do like Docker compose up, and then you have it running. But how do I get that into AWS?
Yeah.
It becomes more complicated because then you need to like take that container and then you need to store it somewhere. So you could use Amazon ECR. You could deploy that container. And the great thing about Lambda is that if you can fit that container under 10 gigabytes, and 10 gigabytes is a lot. I actually looked at Llama 2, and it said on Google that it was like 13 gigabytes. So if an LLM is like that big, like chances are you're not hitting that. I had to take very recently, I had a client, and I had to like take a 15 gigabyte container. I had to build that container. So then I found out it was 15 gigabytes. I had to compress that down to be under 10, because then you can put that into a containerized Lambda, and then you don't have to worry about like kind of a lot of the infrastructure. Lambda will just auto scale. So.
But did I hear this right? Were you trying to put in an LLM itself into a Lambda, or host an LLM within the Lambda? Would that even work? Because of the memory requirements would be just crazy, wouldn't they?
Yeah, it wasn't LLM. They were more like you could get like models from Hugging Face. It was It was like running. So you pass in text, and then it would like parse over it and then use the AI. But it's all the parameters. So like different models will have different like data, like binaries and stuff. So it was the size of the binaries was like really big, and we had like 5 different models in there. So that was where it was like you have like if you were to like download something from Hugging Face, those models are pretty big. So imagine having like 5 of those, but it's not necessarily from Hugging Face. It was like one of them was, or 2 of them was from Hugging Face. One of them was BERT. But yeah, I mean, it's just, there was a lot in there. So that's like, that was that. And then we were able to integrate that into a step function flow, and that worked great. Another thing that could come up though is like, what if you need this to run in Kubernetes? So then you're looking at Amazon EKS. So I hope that this is kind of helpful to see that like, you should try to do like the least like the barrier of least resistance first and try to see like, can I do this with something really simple, like OpenAI API? But if you need to do more stuff, like another example, it was I had to do document downloads. So like take PDF documents that are pretty big and hefty, and I had to like chunk that. And then you think, okay, like this is too much to hit an endpoint. I need to use a LangChain to like parse through and chunk. So you have to like use Python, parse through the PDF, download all the chunks, right? And then like for loop iterate over that into LangChain. And what's cool about LangChain is like you could use OpenAI to like hit that, but the agents are working and chains from LangChain. So I had to do that, but it was like I tried the easiest first, but sometimes the easiest is like not enough. You have to find other tools to get the job done.
So I guess just to zoom out. So like, okay, so I want to get the kind of where the breaking points are. So you're saying, okay, first you can use, say, just the Chat GPT API, right? Where you just pass it in a question string and tell it what model, right? But it's what's the point where that breaks? And then your next step is saying, okay, well, I could use Bedrock, and then okay, when is that not enough, and you want to use RAG, and then what leads you to then doing the deployment with these the full container orchestration? Can you talk us through where those breaking points are?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say the breaking point you want to kind of go about is like, how much budget do you have? And that's kind of where like it sometimes becomes a money question, because it's like it's when you're like hyperparameter tuning a model, that can be very expensive. And I would say like you don't really want to do that. Like if you could just get a model from somewhere else that's like open sourced, or you build a model like locally, if you have the bandwidth to do that, and you can like train it locally, like that's great. But if you're doing like SageMaker hyperparameter tuning, that's going to be very expensive. So I would say if you're able to use a model that already exists, that's already optimized by really smart people, use the model trained by really smart people and like use that first. You want to kind of find like, where does the API break down? So like the PDF extraction, that's like an interesting use case, because so like LangChain, for example, you're able to actually like they have this method for getting text from a web page, and it works really well. And it'll do all the chunking and stuff, but they have like a specific way in which LangChain does that. If you want to do PDF documents, you have to like model that approach, but you have to like actually build out that code. So what I had to do was like, I found like, okay, OpenAI is what I want to use as the model, which is like the GPT, I think it was like 3.5 turbo or something like that.
GPT-4 Turbo is actually doing pretty well with all of that kind of stuff now.
Is it? Oh yeah. I need to test that actually, because I think I used like a lower model for it. Because I don't think GPT-4 Turbo was available at the time when I built it, but I should update it. That'd be a good.
GPT-4 Turbo is about a week old. GPT-4 is also pretty neat.
Yeah.
When it comes to generating code for that stuff.
It is awesome.
That said, even Copilot by itself, if you just went into Visual Studio Code IDE and you use Copilot to basically do all the chunking and extraction, that did a pretty amazing job. So I've tried all three mechanisms, and I actually we were working on a very interesting project where we wanted a mechanism to review a lot of the content that we were creating for a particular purpose. And so we built an AI quality checker, which would basically do a full analysis of the content, and we were generating these 1,000-page documents with AI that had to be reviewed. And so we had to chunk these PDFs in the right way and feed it chapter by chapter into AI and start getting feedback on how to improve it. And that automatically fed into another AI generator, which then generated the new version of it that would get QC. So you could basically run it in a loop, just constantly getting better.
Oh, I love that. That's really cool. And I feel like when you start building your own infrastructure, you find where the breaking point is. It's just, I feel like the breaking point is always, I want to do it this way. What can't I do with that? And then that's where you either need to like use a framework, you need to use some tool. I feel like, so I kind of got into the LLM API stuff, obviously through OpenAI, as everyone else is doing. But as I found Bedrock, what's very cool is that they have a lot of different models with different use cases.
Yeah.
So, oh, Steven, the one that I sent you where like it'll take a transcript and then you could like get a summarization of it.
Well, can we
So,
have a look at that? Let's
oh yeah. Let's let me throw it up.
yeah, perfect. Yeah, you see this screen sharing on the yeah, you've got that.
Yeah, I'll share my.
So Ro, I gave Brian some of our transcripts generated by Transcribe and not quality checked at all. So this is just straight out of Transcribe. I handed him a VTT file. I believe that was our Compute Optimizer episode. So curious. So then, Brian, you have access to a Bedrock summarization model, which is still in preview, right?
Not the one that I was using. I think everyone should be able to access this. Let me know if you can see.
There
can
we
you see
go.
my screen?
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, we can.
Okay, cool. I'm gonna like boost this just to make it a little bit better. Yeah. So this is a model that I believe everyone should have access to. I figured that'd also be helpful because it's kind of like if you demo something that like most people can't use, it's like probably not super helpful. So this model is really cool. So this is
Cohere is available in Bedrock. It's publicly available to everybody.
Yeah. It's awesome. Okay, cool. Yeah, so you know that. So just to give a little bit of the lay of the land. So where it becomes kind of confusing about how to basically we can get this working in like a Jupyter notebook. But I feel like the journey for me was always like, okay, like I get that I can do this in Jupyter notebook in SageMaker or like Colab, but like how do I get this into like a function? And it could be a Lambda, it could be like a server-side function with XJS, like whatever it's trying to be. So what I did was I made an IAM user and I created basically an access token for that user from IAM that has the permission for this. I can actually show you what that is. So there's, you need this. So this is the IAM policy and you just need allow Bedrock access. We're giving it access to everything, but you might want to be more permissive about that. And then there's a trust relationship that you need. So just allowing access to Bedrock with the assume role, and then SageMaker if you're using SageMaker as that. But I'll go through the code of it, and then we could try to like test some of this stuff, which I was like running last night. So basically, we're importing Boto 3. Boto 3 is your like Swiss Army knife of AWS things with Python. We configure a client, and then that's going to be our Bedrock runtime. I'm in US East 1, and of course we're using best practices. So I created an env file that has my AWS key ID and the access key. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to run a function called read VTT file in chunks. And this is a strategy that I had to implement actually because, and I'll show you why. I had to chunk this because it's too much data. The VTT that you sent me, Stephen, is like massive. There's like a ton of text. It was like well over like the 4,000 limit that you need when you hit requests to that type of endpoint. So you basically need to like open the file, and the file path lives here, or here. So I just made a folder called data, and then this is your VTT, and then we read from that, and then we open the file, and we're going to chunk it. And then what we're going to do is that we're going to basically send a prompt of summarize this dialog plus chunk. And then we basically submit that prompt with a temperature of 0.6 just to make it a little bit funky, a little bit cool, and adjust the max tokens. And then the model we're configuring is the command text v14. We're using application JSON for that. And then basically we're doing a try except for getting a response, and we're invoking that model. And then this is like how you'd call it. So when we run this, and I could show you, and just to go a little bit of context. So I ran into this issue because I could only submit like the first 10 minutes of your talk. So this is like you summarize the dialogue and you could like add all this inline, but that's like super cumbersome. And I couldn't do anything really after like the 8-9 minute mark. Otherwise it like wouldn't run. But I could show you actually like what that.
So let's see what this looks like. And so this is running locally for you?
It's running in a code sandbox container.
Oh,
so
I see.
And I have a virtual environment inside of that notebook. Or inside of that code sandbox. actually.
Okay, so this was episode 68. I need to look up which one that was.
Yes. Okay, it's cool. So if we try to do this one, we can try to see if it gives any outputs. Oh yeah. Okay. So sorry, trying to make that space a little bit easier to see.
That's great. Okay, the video captures discussion around the development and investments in the AI space.
Does that sound something similar to what you were talking about?
Yeah, that does.
Okay, cool.
I'll put the link to that episode in the comments. It was made easy, number 68.
Correct. This is where we were talking about AWS making a big investment in Anthropic, up to $4 billion of investment over the next 3 or 4 years. And that was the big talk because Microsoft had OpenAI that they were partnering with. And so the question was, what's AWS's answer? And their big bet was on Anthropic.
Yeah, that's right. So the first 10 minutes of that episode, we covered news, and that was the big,
Correct.
the big investment at the time. I'll put that one here. We have a great comment by Rafaela Han. Put this up. Gen AI presents new challenges and opportunities for FinOps. It'll be interesting to see its evolution. So I guess
Definitely.
Oh, hey Rafaela. Rafaela is really cool. Everyone should follow her. She posts a lot of great content on FinOps at AWS. But thanks for coming.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you for being here. And really good. So maybe Brian, why don't you take us through that? So when you're putting AI into production for a client, what do you talk about in terms of cost and setting expectations, and where have you found surprises in terms of costs of AI, right? Because like Bedrock, you can tell it's about, what is it, like $1 per what was the amount of tokens?
It's about $1 per million tokens or so.
Yeah. Okay, so like a cent for 100 questions or something like that. Yeah, it's not. But where are the surprises in the AI costs when you're putting these into deployment? And your stack is EKS often, or containers. Just can you talk us through that, both in terms of cost and just some of the more details of the stack?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, cost is super important. I think that is definitely a breaking point. You want to think about that very closely. I'd say, so my stack would be, if I just need to run an AI model, right? I probably think like we're doing request response. I'm thinking Lambda, and I'm thinking like we could just do that. That has auto scaling that works really well. It's very, very cheap. Where like it gets kind of confusing of like how we're doing this though is, okay, like if we want to configure API gateway, right? At API gateway, we can hit a Lambda. That works great. Also cheap. Let's say we want to start storing data. I'd probably recommend DynamoDB. Very cheap, very fast, lightning fast. We're adding a database to that. Let's say that we want to add a vector store. Maybe we want to use Pinecone. Maybe we want to use MongoDB. They have Atlas vector search. We want to start storing those types of things. Also very cheap, very like easy to integrate, easy to use. Where it gets more complicated and where it gets more costly is like, let's say that we have a step function flow and we're running containerized Lambdas, and these Lambdas take it might take like 3 minutes or 4 minutes to process. The reason it takes 4 minutes to process is because you're like parsing over a very big vast amount of binaries in a model, and it needs to process all of that. So you can have like a cron job that's running the cron stuff. Where the killer is that when you start having these Lambdas that need a lot of memory, because it'll crash, you need to like allow access. This is like the same thing with SageMaker, where like if your SageMaker notebook is like it can't handle, doesn't have the right server, it won't be able to deploy an endpoint. And I had to deploy an LLM, and it was crashing because I wasn't configuring the right server for it. So once you have a very kind of like a very juicy Lambda with like a lot of memory, and it's running for a long period of time with like maybe like a 10-minute timeout, if you're running a really big Lambda for a long time and you have step functions and they're all doing that, yeah, sure. Like if you're running a Lambda for like 5 seconds, like that is very relatively cheap. It could be a container. But if you start having like 3 minutes times like 5 gigabytes or 8 gigabytes times very many lambdas in a step function, you then need to think how many users are now calling this and how often. So if you have something that runs like 10 times an hour per user, now you're running a very, very expensive workflow. And that's kind of where you want to get ahead of that before you start seeing your AWS, like the console widget, where it now says, oh, you're now being billed like $500 a day. And I had some credits to burn right before the summer. So I was like playing around with like, I deployed Llama 2 on SageMaker and I had a live endpoint. And I love like learning through experience because it's like you learn these experiences yourself. That means you don't have a client make a mistake. I always feel like I should make the mistake before like I put that into production and work. And I had credits to burn, so I was like, why not? So it was running like $200 or $300 a day, and then I started getting these anomalies emails. I knew that was going to happen, but I just wanted to see what would occur. And I was thinking about that, and I tallied it up, and I was like, if I had this running for like a whole month, that's like $2,000 a month. You really need to know, like when you deploy a live endpoint on SageMaker, when you have a step function flow that's very like compute intensive, time intensive, you have to make sure you understand and you're monitoring this like even per hour or for the first 24 hours something's live, because I feel like everything is avoidable within like a 2-day span from what I've seen, right? Like worst case scenario, it could be like, I don't know, $100, like $200 of like unexpected stuff. But if you had like $2,000 billing a day that you didn't account for, that's like a nightmare you don't want to be in, and you need to follow this. I love the cost widget in AWS Management Console because I look at that. But I mean, that's what you want to look at is like how long does something need to run for and how often is it being invoked? Because you could be using the cheapest tools and the services, but it's the configuration. If you're running EC2 on a very large ML instance, that's something where like it could be billing like $8 an hour. If you don't turn that down, like in SageMaker or an endpoint, you're going to be billing yourself that cost. That's what I'd say. But I'm curious what you guys think too.
Yeah, I would actually slice this. I think pretty much what you said was on point. I would slice it one other way, which is you have a bunch of fixed costs, and those fixed costs are pretty standard and easy to compute, easy to kind of optimize, because there's enough wisdom now across over a decade on these fixed costs. The fixed costs could be your data storage, like we were discussing this earlier, and I've talked about this earlier. If you're using a fixed storage for OLTP transactions, use something like DynamoDB. If you're doing OLAP kind of things, use S3 with Athena if you don't care so much about the latencies. If you care about latencies, try Spectrum. If you care even more about latencies, and those have to be kind of sub hundreds of milliseconds, then go ahead and use Redshift. You use RDS for some of the more kind of in between kind of not transactions, but storage, where you might need to run certain kinds of SQL queries, off and on. But you have that Spectrum for the fixed cost, and you can optimize that pretty well. Where it gets challenging is your variable costs. And the only strategy that I've known to work with variable costs is to always have alerts and caps or limits on how much you want to spend, and always start with low limits. So no matter what project, we always have the team start with a limit of $100. You basically learn very quickly about how fast you can burn $100. And $100 is not that big a deal to kind of put at risk. But whenever you put that in, always make sure that for all your variable costs, put a limit and put alerts so that you immediately know how fast you burnt your first $100. And that is not even an indication of what is going to happen in production. That's an indication of what you're going to do in dev. Now, from that, you start projecting out what that might look like for a production-like environment. It might be, I'm going to have 1,000x the throughput coming through, or 1,000x the volume of transactions coming through as I move from dev to production. And in those scenarios, if you burnt $100 in a day, 1,000x that, because that's your variable component of it, That's what you're going to burn in a day when you move to production. So that'll help you make a lot of decisions about what you need to make, what you need to do for the long run as you're going to put stuff into production.
It better be a really, really good application to have the marginal benefit past that marginal. Well, I guess that's bringing it back to FinOps, right? It's unit economics, right? Knowing what the cost of a click is as this user's click triggers this chain of possibly, like you said, Brian, long running Lambda functions. And is that click worth it in terms of the expected value that the user's getting and then adding to your bottom line?
Yeah.
It's fun. As a former machine learning / statistics consultant, I found that people really got fixated on accuracy, but to the point where they said there's diminishing returns to accuracy. And you don't always need it, right? Like if you are doing if you're doing a trading algorithm, you just want to be right like more often than you're wrong. But the idea of, can you predict a stock price 10 minutes into the future exactly versus are you reliably right that it's going to go up? Right. And you might, the marginal cost of increasing accuracy, it's that Pareto principle, right? It skyrockets towards the end. And so the same with machine learning, the same with LLMs, right? Maybe you have a really, really cool multi-model setup, but it's over delivering on what your users need. If your users are just asking for, I don't know, a recipe suggestion, maybe you don't need to use a hybrid of 10 different models.
And I think on that, I have one piece of advice that I have found to be very true, which is that when you're doing this kind of math, specifically for projecting out costs, there's definitely this sense of, or there's this, like you said, there's this notion that you have to get a level of accuracy, and it's just false precision at that point. In general, if you just applied an order of magnitude as your rule of thumb, I think you'd be pretty safe. Like you're only allowed to answer a question in tens, hundreds, thousands, millions, 10 millions, a billion. Okay, you're not allowed to say I can do 4 transactions or I can do 783 transactions. You are only allowed to choose an order of magnitude precision. And if you force your teams to do that, if you force yourself to do that, you'll find that you'll generally be very safe. You'll make a very conservative, like, let's say you're expecting 1 to 2 million transactions. At that point, you'd basically say, I'm expecting 10 million transactions. And so the decisions that you're going to make for it are going to be safe. You will find yourself making decisions that are just safe for every scenario when you do this order of magnitude computation. And that is probably the right answer in these cases, because then you're not stuck in analysis paralysis, spending weeks or months trying to analyze every aspect and dimension of pricing for every service. You just make a decision and you move forward. And the margin of error is large enough that it'll protect you.
I love that. And another thing, just to throw into the mix, just on what you just said, Rahul. So one of the things that also comes up right when you're deploying, applications or you're deploying servers, your APIs or those types of endpoints, kind of like so like you could deploy something with serverless, you could deploy something with containers. I think you need to build based upon what your team knows the best. But if you like deploy something with EKS or that's running on a container, like you should see if you can do serverless. There was I saw this viral tweet. I want to say it was like Adam who said it. I'll try to see if I can find it and like share it in the chat. But he talked about how like a lot of companies think that like they don't need serverless, that they're like they have a unique use case. And I feel like everyone has a unique use case, but like you want to have a unique way to manage your cost. And serverless is a great way of that. I have found that like if you need to deploy something with EKS, you could use potentially like App Runner, configure your WAF, configure your all the parameters that you want and deploy that. You could do Fargate, and that's like a great way also that has like the auto scaling benefits of that. And there's a lot of just really great use cases with ECS. Like I was looking about the horizontal pod auto scaling, and that was like just yesterday. There's a lot of really great use cases for serverless containerized deployments. So it's like with EKS, what's great about that is that you manage your infrastructure, in terms of deploying it, but then AWS is managing like the auto scaling for you. Where it can get a little bit dicey, I found though, is that if you're doing things that EKS might not expect, and I ran into this very recently. There was an issue with ingress related to EKS, and there were like 2 lines of code that needed to be added to basically change the token allowance to not crash the Nginx server. But that stuff can come up, and those are the gotchas too, where you could have a very complicated infrastructure that, breaks because of something, because you add something, and you need to account for that too. Not even just the cost of the services, but also cost of time. So like, how long will it take a team of people to figure out an issue? That's another thing. But I would say, and this maybe is a hot take, but I just feel like in this day and age, like there will be things that ChatGPT or like Hugging Face Chat or Google Bard, they won't get. But if you're building and you're not using an LLM, I'm thinking like, what are you doing? I've spoken to so many people that aren't using these tools, and I'm like, would you just not use Google? Like, is it a pride thing? Is it like a I know best? I just feel like in this day and age, you can't afford to not be using these very advanced tools. They're just too good to like not be giving yourself that extra boost in everything you do.
Yeah, this is actually very interesting. So the other day I was chatting with a friend who's non-technical but CEO of a company, and he was basically talking to me about how every other department in his company has adopted generative AI in a very big way, whether it be sales, whether it be marketing, whether it be any of the other organizations. He said it's the technical folks that he struggles to get aligned with, using these LLMs or using generative AI to get more productive. And it's a very interesting take. I think there are a lot of technical folks, particularly engineers, who feel like their value is diminished because they are not writing a lot of this code. But I think the thing that I'd like to remind everyone is the value of the person who's writing code is not typing the code or figuring out syntax of the code. That is the mundane, non-valuable part of what you do. The value is in defining how you want to organize and structure your entire application. The value is in problem solving and trying to figure out an interesting way to tackle a particular business problem that then needs to be translated into code. But actually writing out the code is the easy part. And it's the mundane, trivial part that you should actually let the LLM do. What your job is to take that business requirement and translate it into a technical requirement and be that bridge and create structure around how you want everything organized. That's the incredibly valuable part today. Now, it's possible that in another year or so, organizing it in a structured manner becomes, part of the mundane and, the regular stuff, because there's enough knowledge about how you should organize your code base. What are the best practices? If you're using MVC architecture, there's a particular way you structure everything. And that's a good thing too. So you should be moving up the stack, providing higher order services, higher order business value, and not be stuck with the mundane stuff, because, it's like, it's not valuable anymore. So to hold on to it feels like, a foolish endeavor.
And Brian, I agree. Well, Rahul, I agree with what you said. There's a pride thing, right? If you spend years perfecting this craft of, I can write a code from memory to reverse a linked list, right? Like that's a rite of passage. And Brian, you really got my brain spinning of like, would you just not use Google once it came out? I don't know how old you're, but Rahul, like you and I remember the days of web rings, where you have a link on the bottom of a web page. And how did you find another thing? Well, like people would form these web rings based on topics, and
Yes.
you just click to the next web page, or you go to Yahoo, and it's basically like a list of categories. Like it was static lists of web pages divided into categories, and like what Google brought on top of search, that's like a perfect analogy for what LLMs are bringing to thought, to structure, to organization. So what do you think? What's the future of LLMs? And I love how have LLMs helped you personally to grow, to learn? I know you have some thoughts about using LLMs as a learning aid.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I wish that I had like ChatGPT as a tutor back in school. I mean, like you know, like I didn't have tutors, but like there were things where I was reading books, like textbooks, and I didn't understand what it was saying, and I would read it 5 times, and it like wouldn't make sense. You know, as you read other things, not just like bio or like physics or something like that. But I just remember that of like I just need this explained in a way that I can understand it. Like it's just the way that they're teaching it. I just don't get it. And I remember like with physics, that was one of the hardest classes for me because I just like I didn't get it. But it was like knowing it now, I know that like I'm a very visual learner. So like I can have ChatGPT instruct me to be like, I need explanation of this. Can you in bullet points create a mind map of this topic or create like a flow chart, and it will like use characters to like visualize it out. Super helpful. And I feel like the future of this is like there will be software engineers that it'll be expected to know how to use LLMs. So kind of in like there's like that viral tweet of someone said that they're a Googler and their skills on the resume. We're interviewing them. It's like you probably want to say that you're you've integrated with LLMs or you're an LLMer or something like that. Like it's a topic because your resourcefulness is judged by how quickly you can turn around tasks. You don't necessarily, and I feel like this too is that you don't necessarily need to be the smartest person in the room, but you can always be the hardest working and you can always be the most resourceful. And I found that like literally from school, from life, from everything, I've always found that like I will like be the first person in and the last one to leave. Like I've always found that hard work will outdo any intelligence from what I found, generally speaking. But like in most cases, like 9 out of 10. And I found that like with LLMs and stuff. So I've been doing a lot of upskilling myself. I've been learning a lot of more advanced patterns for Python, for deploying Kubernetes and containers. Very complicated topics that, to be honest, really intimidated me when I started learning coding. I kind of stuck with like the JavaScript route and like, okay, I learn apps, I learn these things. You find with machine learning, at least I found over the last 2 years of like, Brian, you need to learn Python. And now you could just go and you're like, I wrote this Python script, but I'm getting this error. I want to do X. How do I accomplish this? Please show me in steps. You could also say too, like, I don't want you to tell me the answer, but I want you to give me a hint about how to get there. And it's like, I feel like that's the expectation, right? Like, I don't think that companies are going to be hiring prompt engineers. Like I've seen all the articles and like, I don't really buy it. Like I could not imagine someone being paid like $500K to like ask ChatGPT things. But what I could see is a really, really, really resourceful, very hardworking software engineer that's like software engineer prompt engineering, where they're a software engineer, but they're very integrated into APIs, solution architecting on AWS, and they know how to use AI models. So it could be Hugging Face, deploying stuff from GitHub, like you pull stuff down, like knowing all those skills. I could definitely see software engineer prompt engineering or like even copywriters. Like it would be expected for you to know how to use an LLM for writing sales copy or social media copy or press releases or something like that.
Yeah, I changed the job description or the job profile to something different, which is the people who are going to get hired are the people who can do the same task, like you said, 10x faster.
Yes.
The turnaround time on those tasks are going to be 10x better. And in today's world, the only way to do that is to leverage these LLMs. If you don't know how to do it, you're going to be left behind because there are going to be, a million other people who are all over this right now and who are going to be absolutely churning out tons and tons of new stuff every single day. If you're a software company, there are companies out there that are turning out products every week with the use of LLMs. There are content generators and media people who are creating content literally with dozens of articles every single day or dozens of posts every single day. And if you're not, able to keep up with all of that because you don't have the right tooling in place and you're not familiar with it, then you're obviously going to, be left behind.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say just to build on that, I do know probably a lot of people that might watch this and then they're going to go, yeah, you guys, obviously LLMs are cool, but like my company won't allow me to do that. So there's also this trend that I'm seeing with enterprise companies that can afford this, building your own private LLM that does not train data, going back to OpenAI. That's something that I'm seeing like across the board for companies that can. So it is pricey. It's not cheap. You're obviously like, your $20 JetGPT. This is, in the 4 or 5 figures. This is significantly more than that. It might be 6 figures. But what that allows you, though, is that if you could use all the power of an AI model, but it's not going back and training, it all stays within a private loop. They have different enterprise licenses for these AI models. Like, reach out to these companies directly. Like, I'm always a fan of like, send the DM, like message the person, see what can happen. Because if you talk to the right person and they're like, they like your company, they might give you like a key that allows you access to privatize a model. Also Azure OpenAI, like if you wanted to do some like hybrid cloud cross accounts and stuff, like I've seen that in several different use cases. That's where I feel like companies won't be able to afford not having the tooling. Because sure, you could say, oh, we're concerned about private data, going back to the AI model, totally legitimate concern. Why are you not building your own version? Obviously, you need to have the budget for that, but if you can do that, your teams will be stacked. It'll be much more efficient across the board.
I think I completely agree with that. And I think even services like Bedrock go a long way in actually helping companies adopt a more private version where the data doesn't go back in training. So you should definitely explore all of those. And I'll give you one other data point. Almost every CEO, CIO that I've spoken to over the last 6 months has told me that they have a mandate at the board level, at the very least, to do something interesting and exciting with AI, particularly around productivity. So I have not heard one organization that says, no, we don't want to do anything with AI, or we're not going to allow our people to do it. Like, that's rare. It might be at a sub-managerial level, but if you're looking at it top down, everyone understands that this is the next big wave of productivity improvements. And it's like what video conferencing did to the workspace. This is 100x or 1000x more powerful than that. So it's a tool that everyone is starting to adopt, and if it's beneficial to everyone to kind of get ahead of that game.
And it's interesting. Like, I've heard companies saying we're doing a pause while we get the right procedures and policies in place. But Brian, like, back to your point, imagine if you were interviewing at a software company and they said, by the way, you can't Google, you can't Stack Overflow, we've got a set of books over there, and that's your resource. At some point, it's going to flip, right? Where that company is going to have trouble hiring people and retaining people, because if there's not a roadmap or a plan in place, or at least a mandate from the top down that this is the direction that we're going to, there's going to be a difficulty in keeping and retaining talent, because most people are seeing that this is where it's going. And that doesn't mean jump in with both feet, totally blindfolded to privacy issues, but it does mean, hey, this is where it's going. It's not going to be a passing fad. I don't know if you remember, there's this great video about when picture messages came out in the UK, and the BBC was like, this might be just a passing trend of MMSs with pictures attached. Turns out it wasn't.
Very true.
Well, cool. This has been a really great conversation, and Brian, you're really, really inspiring. I want to use LLMs the way you've done in terms of personal improvement, in terms of learning. I really like that idea of, give me a hint. Don't tell me, but help me adapt this to my current mindset. Give me, an analogy that will make sense to me, right? If I had the rag of how I learn stuff, and say, help me it's not clicking this way. Give me a better analogy, and to have it actually generate that. That's such a neat thing, right? That was
one interesting prompt, by the way, that you can use with ChatGPT and a bunch of others, is to actually say something like, explain this as if I were a 10th grader. Or there's a particular thing called a Lexile level. That is a level of that basically is a metric for how you read stuff. So you can actually ask it to produce content that is conformant to a particular Lexile level. And that can really help you understand the content at that level. It'll use far less difficult words. It'll use different words. It'll structure the content in a manner that is easier to read at lower levels. And I do believe that almost all content now is obsolete. The way it stood, the static content is all obsolete. You should be able to generate content for your needs, for your specific purpose on the fly, as and when needed. And that's really where the future of learning and the future of content is.
Oh, absolutely. I do have just a quick thing. If I could just show you guys like
yes, absolutely.
I have some updates on it. Let me just do it. It'll only be like a minute, but I just think it's really cool to show.
Yes.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
There we go.
It is.
Okay.
Okay, sweet. So just from before, so I thought this was kind of interesting when you could do like prompt engineering, but like as a software engineer, right? So when we were doing this before, we're able to like call the endpoint and stuff. So I just changed this one part to summarize this dialogue from Cloud Fix's AWS Made Easy Livestream. And then it now knew Stephen, your name, is discussing the recent advancements of AI, talked about Anthropic. So when we can like fine tune the prompt to be a little bit more scoped to what we want, that's where the LLM will be a little bit smarter. Yes. I wanted to show you the web streaming from this model, because when we do these other like verbose files that I have, I just wanted to show you what it looks like because it's pretty cool.
Yeah, let's have a look.
So this also has that chunking strategy that I showed you from before. So again, we're like reading in chunks. I increased the chunk size. This is something that you might want to adjust. Also putting it into 2 paragraphs, and then pulling the file and stuff. So this is the chunk, right? So I'm just optimizing that a little bit, and then prompt goes into prompt max tokens. You can adjust this. Sometimes reducing it can help with outputs, but if we do that, we do Python T outputs. So it's going to now start kind of pumping out text like ChatGPT.
Yeah.
So did you have Darko on this?
Yes.
And Steph?
But we didn't have them both on the same.
No, I think we talked about some highlights. Is that right? I'm trying to figure out how it got that.
Oh, interesting.
Has it indexed our public pages with?
No. I see. No. So at that point in time, so I'm looking at episode 68, and at that point in time, the build on live cost optimization day was in the future, and I was just about ready to go to that, and Darko and Steph were hosting that, and so we were talking about that.
Oh, you're talking about that. Yeah, got it.
So it'll start kind of pumping through it. So I think what you'd want to do, Rahul, you had talked about this, was like you basically run the model, you get an output, and then you run a model on this. So basically what this is doing is like it's summarizing this in specific chunks. So before, I have like a verbose one. This is like the 4th iteration of this where I was like optimizing it further. It just kept going and going and going. It was almost like summarizing every like thought in the texting, right, which was interesting. So this was like telling it to like only do certain things, and then only chunk certain characters. But yeah, something about SQL, AWS Made Easy from CloudFix, like. So it's interesting how you can kind of get that web streaming effect where it's like, oh, this is really cool from ChatGPT, but you can now do this with Bedrock with a model that supports the streaming functionality as a parameter.
Would it be hard to ask a question of this text?
We could try. Basically what it's doing is it's just set to summarize it, but do you want me to do something where like
Well-
summarize this in chunks and do something?
Well, okay. So there was one part of this episode where we talked about the X2 IEDN instance, and we were both laughing that it was the longest instance name we've ever seen. So can you
It's
ask it?
Yeah.
If we asked it, like, what was the instance name that Rahul and Steven found funny or something?
Oh yeah, let me see.
Yeah.
Please and
Actually, we can take out the summary and just ask this question. I think we should still do a pretty neat job of that.
find out the EC2 instance. Sound funny?
Yeah.
Yeah. Take out the summarization because I think that's not needed in this.
Oh sure, yeah.
So we'll give it something very specific. Yeah, great.
Yeah, we'll try this. And
Let's
see
try
if
that
it
out.
works.
No.
It's going really fast.
GPU instances.
I think it'll still try to summarize it because it's like a summarizer model.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
But I wonder if it'll find it. Oh,
There.
X2.
We have the X1 and the X1, X2 is.
Well, it
different.
was the X2 IEDN, so it's picking up on it, but it's not picking up on it perfectly.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the X2 would be like the family.
Yeah.
So Rahul has even seemed to find the X1 and X2 instances I'm using. These instances were originally created.
That's pretty good.
I mean, it's definitely finding it. So I feel like you would want to run this again, where it's like take all this as text, like in temp
Yeah.
storage, and then like run a model on it to summarize this. But
Oh wow! It even picked up our little analogy to Fantasia. So what we were saying, I remember the scene from Fantasia where Mickey
Yeah.
casts a spell on the brooms, and then he
Yeah.
falls asleep, and it's like runaway automation. And
yeah,
so that's okay. Well, thank you for sharing
Awesome.
this code with us.
yeah, of course, happy to.
All right, I've got one other question. So when people say LLMs are just predicting the next word, right? It's not that fancy. They're just predicting the next word. How do you respond to that?
I would say, aren't we all doing that with everything we do? It's kind of like I feel like AI imitates a lot of the things that we think about work or ourselves, right? So it's like when you're assigned a task, right? You chain things together. You are building an output that accomplishes some goal. You know, you deliver to your boss says, "That's amazing." You know, like this is great, or like do it again, like this isn't great. So like we're all different. I said this like in a different conversation, but I was like, we're all kind of EC2 instances at a certain point. Like we all scale with sleep, right? When we get more sleep, we can scale larger. It's like these models and stuff. It's very interesting. Like I think, sure, it's just predicting the next word, but when you think about like actual learning, Steven, we were just talking about this yesterday. When you learn, you read a book, you're basically taking in parameters that's going into your store, and then now your reality or how you see the world is changed by certain parameters that are now like in your vector store in your brain. I don't actually think of humans as like machines. I'm just using it as an analogy. I'm not that robotic, but it's like it's helpful to think about because when we learn something, so like I've been spending a lot of time learning about containers and Kubernetes. So the way that I'm storing that data might be very different from you. Like these are complicated tasks for me like 2 years ago that now I'm finding like the right mentor explains it in the right way. LLM can explain it to me. I watch a video that's very insightful. I build my parameters of how I attack an issue. And then when there was like that Nginx issue with Kubernetes, I was like, oh, I have seen this before. Let me see if I can search online resources that I have of like what might the answer be. I'm programmed to see it a certain way. And then when I was able to find that like 2 lines on the GitHub issue, I was like, oh, that rings a bell because that reminds me of something that I studied very recently. There's schema, there's context. Was that predictive? Because I trained my model to see problems in a certain way based upon knowledge that I had gained. And then I'm able to get potentially an output and test. So then, you put that live and like, it could have worked, it could have not worked. And it ended up solving the problem. But like, if it didn't, for loop. Okay, so if this doesn't work, execute something else until blah.
Yeah.
Again, we're not all robots, but I feel like the models do a lot of the stuff that we do. Even in ChatGPT now, it's kind of funny because like when you ask ChatGPT 4, it'll like, it started doing this and I think they stopped doing it because it's kind of hilarious. It's like, now searching Bing. And it's like, wait a second, why are you doing that? Like I do that. Like, why aren't you supposed to know what's on Bing? So
Right.
I just think that that's kind of funny where like there are those limitations to what models can do. Yeah, sure, they are predictive, but like, so are we. We're trying to anticipate the future. Yeah. We're trying to build the future. So, but I'm curious, like, what do you guys think too?
Oh,
Steven?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I could respond, I'm just a collection of random molecules trying to get my DNA to survive, right? That's technically true. And then, like you said, it's predictive, right? I want to have a meal. And so therefore I need a house, and therefore I need a fridge, and therefore I need an income. And like, I'm all optimizing for this next thing, right? And, or like you said, it's a lot of all of these, what we think higher level constructs might all be abstractions that can be summarized by I'm trying to predict the next thing. And all of the work that we do underneath that could just be leading up to that prediction. Just like the LLMs have, I think people who dig into the structure inside of LLMs, like, okay, they're representing a board game, and there's an internal representation of a board game. So that when you say, what's the next good move, there's some structure behind that prediction. Yeah. So I think it might, I think we're trying to hold on to something special, but maybe it's not. Maybe we're all just trying to optimize for these certain incentives, and then we build up these abstractions to help us do that in a structured and sustainable way.
Yeah, I explain it more like intuition, and it's very aligned with what you were talking about, Brian, where all of our experiences, all of our learning goes into building up an intuition. So even when I'm having this conversation, I don't know what I'm going to say 30 seconds from now, but based on what I've said so far, there's an intuition about this is what should come out of my mouth next, which would make sense. Similarly, when I'm trying to solve a problem, I have an intuition about what might be the first approach to hit. And if that fails, then you go on to the second one, and then a third one. And then the more experiences you have, the better you get with your intuition. And that intuition becomes muscle memory at some point. So I think it's a very similar approach. The question is, what kind of experiences are the machines being trained on? What kind of experiences and content are they learning? And what kind of what is the capability of that intuition? Like, our life experiences probably span trillions of parameters equivalent compared to what the LLMs are being trained on, or maybe even more. So, and I think it's just going to be this race of, over a period of time, you're going to have machines that are going to be able to do even more and be able to have that intuition, which is even crisper or even better fine-tuned to a lot of the common tasks that we take for granted today.
Oh, absolutely.
So I guess, sorry.
Oh, just a quick point on that. I think that when LLMs become more ubiquitous, right? Like, people are using these, companies are using these. And I've had a lot of conversations with people about this. And I think it's really important. Definitely ethics is going to be huge, and also making sure that these models are equitable for like how it sees the world. Because there's a lot of problems that can come down about like if it's a data set that's very limited and then it's not inclusive of like many different perspectives, many different people's ideas. like views of the world, right? These LLMs will be limited not just in the data, but also in terms of the valuable outputs. And yeah, even just making sure that like we like as developers build ethically, but then also we make the models like ethical too, because that's I think those are topics that sometimes get pushed to the side of like, you know, build, but if you're building tools for people that people will rely on, there sort of needs to be that and there's I don't know if you know the company Effectiva. They it's a Boston-based company, and it just got acquired. And the CEO, former CEO, she's a doctor, and she talks about like ethical, emotional, and artificial intelligence, and really, really important because that like when you're building tools for humans, it needs to treat humans correctly, and it needs to give the right insights, and it needs to this like imagine ChatGPT giving you really snarky answers. You're like, why don't you know about generator functions, Brian, or something like that, right? It's oh, thanks for dropping the link in the chat. I love the work that she's been doing to lead this company, and I think emotional AI is something that it's just it's a cool topic. But that's kind of where like ChatGPT is probably trained to say like the human that's asking this might not know the answer. You need to make them like raise them up. You need to like make them seem smart. You want to inspire them, encourage them. You can prompt train it to do that, but I mean like they did that behind the scenes so that it's not just saying for loop is this. It's saying, sure, I hear what you want to do this. Is that correct? Because if that's the case, here's a code snippet. Otherwise, it's this. That's like at a higher level of like building. And I think that's a very cool way to think about building, right? Is like it's not just about the outputs, but about like how the outputs be received by users. Is it the most optimized for all the people that will use it, or if not, make it more equitable so that it does? But things I think about. Yeah.
Well, it's so neat. Like even just saying please to an LLM, right? That's an interesting question because on the one hand, it should be meaningless. This thing has no feelings, but on the other hand, it turns out that when you add that little bit of politeness, it goes to a slightly different place in the model, and polite conversations tend to be higher quality. And so by adding please, you're actually sending it to a slightly different place where it's going to pick from higher quality conversations. And just to think about what you were saying, Brian, like both the solution to LLMs and for individuals, right, is get more data, get a wider source of data, talk to lots of people, understand their perspectives, build empathy, read lots of books, travel to places, right? And the LLM, it's ingest lots of different kinds of data from all over the place, and try and get a bigger perspective than just, a very, I mean, sometimes you want a narrow data set for a particular job, but, for a general model, you want a general perspective.
I agree.
Exactly. Okay. And I dropped Dr. Rana Calliope's LinkedIn in the chat. So like I remember like following her. So this was back when I was in college, and you're just like you're networking with different people on the internet, and even going back, this was before I got into tech, but I was just very inspired about like these are real practitioners that are pioneers of ways of using AI. Like you read a book about AI, but that's only like a snippet. So it's really cool. And like, I definitely recommend giving her a follow because she posts a lot of really great insights. She does a lot of talks too. I haven't had the opportunity to like go to one of her talks, but she posts a lot of the insights that she sees on the job and is very cool. But yeah, she's like one of those few people that talked about the emotional aspect of AI, and very interesting. I maybe want to talk to her on a live stream sometime. I don't know if she does live streams, but definitely a really cool person to follow on LinkedIn.
We'll find out. I pasted the link in, but I pasted it in slightly wrong. So it says the link and then opens in a new tab. So I've just repasted the link.
Nice.
And then I think we should wind up. I like to highlight Raphael Han's comment here. Here we go. I get into fights with ChatGPT all the time, but also remember to thank it so it spares me when AIs take over the world. Yep. Make sure to be a good node in that big neural network.
We best be doing that.
Weight.
Definitely. Anyway, Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. I think we could talk about this endlessly. We could spend days literally on this particular conversation, but we'd love to have you back to continue this conversation at some point in the future.
I would
But
love
thank
that.
you once again for coming, and this was an absolutely delightful conversation.
Oh, Earl, Stephen, I mean, thank you so much. I love all the live streams. It was a real honor to be, on your live stream and talk about this exciting talks. And I imagine the next time if we do a live stream, I wonder what will change, right? Like I imagine the AI space will be so different. So
we should use the generative AI to create a comparative study of the 2 episodes and say what changed from this conversation to this.
Or even we can do an outline. What are the topics that we should talk about?
Yeah.
All right, this will be fun. They're very, very meta.
yes.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see everyone next week. And thank you, audience, for tuning in. Thank you for your comments, and please just follow us for more. All right, have a good one,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, buddy.
Some tools just find AWS cost savings and make you do all the work. Visualizing cost opportunities is great, but that's not enough. CloudFix, on the other hand, actually delivers those savings for you. And you don't need to worry because CloudFix fixers are AWS recommended and easy to use. It's the only tool that fixes cost savings opportunities and doesn't just find them. It's the easiest way to save money on AWS. It's all 100% automatic and risk-free. And the best part is that it works non-stop. See for yourself. Click on the button to get a free demonstration of CloudFix and stop over.
Dry, have hydration. Reinvent, they usually give you a little Reinvent water bottle, and those are refillable, and there's lots of water filling stations around. But if you want something else, you have to plan ahead. There's big lines for everything. Okay, the line is going to be 20 minutes.
Oh yeah. Getting a coffee at Vegas, it's like at least 20-30 minutes. You know the one coffee shop at Venetian where you go through and then there's an expo.
Yeah.
That coffee shop has like long queues. They just keep going and going and going. It's like I cannot get a coffee without standing in queue. So yes, it is huge. Not just by the scale, but also the time that you're going to be spending in every queue for food, for water, everything has to have a queue.
Though, however, if you're at the expo floor, make use of a lot of the coffee stations. You will get coffee over there, and it's a great way to pick up at least a quick coffee or water or things like that as you're transiting, between different places.
Carry your lip balm. Vegas is dry.
Yes.
As a weather, it's very dry. So carry lip balm or moisturizer. It just gets crazy dry. Yeah.